Hey guys, welcome back to Project Bodybuilding. When I was watching the Olympia this year, the classic physique division specifically, I had Chris Bumstead clearly winning and Ramon Dino in a firm second. But then, I did not have the third place finisher Urs Kalecinksi in my third place. I actually had Breon Ainsley in third and Urs behind him in fourth. This obviously didn't turn out to be the case, but I wondered who else held this opinion. I put out a poll last week simply asking you guys who deserved to place higher. And I did expect a good amount of the vote to be for Breon. Personally, I thought it was a pretty clear victory over Urs for Breon, so I expected maybe 30% of the vote would be for Breon, but I was wrong. Actually, over half of the fans that voted in this poll thought that Breon should have placed higher than Urs. With this in mind, I just decided to put together a comparison and try to answer the question, was Breon robbed of third place? I hate to use the word robbed because usually that means it wasn't close, but the guy that was clearly supposed to place lower actually placed higher anyway. But before we jump into this comparison, let's take a look at the scorecard because apparently it wasn't close. If you look at both the scores for Urs and Breon, both of these guys got straight scores for third and fourth place respectively. This is just nonsense. Really, this whole scorecard is trash. You can see the judges literally made up the scores as they went, probably even after the awards were given. They didn't list the scores for finals nor prejudging, but they conveniently had most of these guys with perfect scores for their relative placings. This really pisses me off, and I plan to do a full video about how the IFBB scores these contests, but to make a long story short and to add context to this video, keep in mind that every single judge voted Urs in third place, and all those same judges voted for Breon in fourth. Anyway, let's jump into this comparison starting with the front double biceps. We're looking for two things in the shot as always, good arms and a good silhouette. We all know that besides his back, Urs's arms are his weakest body part. Honestly, I don't know what it is, but for being called the classic physique division and embodying the golden era where they all had terrific arms, these guys nowadays have some of the weakest arms I've ever seen. Breon's arms are not only the best out of these two guys, but he easily had the best arms in the top 5. Urs's arms are flat and pretty lifeless by comparison. Breon's are double the size and just scream old school bodybuilding. Now for the silhouette department of the pose, Urs is definitely stronger here. He's taller, which always helps, but he does cut a better X-frame in general. His lats sweep out a little bit more and his waist is smaller than Breon's, and Urs has the bigger legs and more sweep, which helps that V-taper in the upper body become a solid X-frame. And don't forget those calves too. I hardly ever bring up the calves because I want my judging to be accurate, and I really don't think the actual IFBB judges give two shits about calves anymore, but in my book, besides the body parts like big arms and a big chest, calves are actually one of the most important old school body parts I can think of. Big props to Urs for that massive set of calves. Anyway, Breon has the arms, but Urs has the silhouette. But let's dig a little deeper. Breon has the arms easily and isn't that bad at the silhouette at all, but he is getting beat by Urs in that department. Now, Urs has really poor arms and just has a better silhouette. It's not an absolute trouncing like Breon does to him in the arms. So really, I have Breon winning the pose. Not only is he not dropping the ball in the silhouette department like Urs is doing in the arms, but he brings a better, more seasoned quality to his physique. Breon is over 40, which is crazy in and of itself, but it does have its perks. Mainly, he has more muscle maturity. He's harder, grainier, the cuts are deeper, the details are sharper, he's denser, and so on. And that adds to the silhouette department to help get him closer. Sure, the outline is important, but when the lights come on, we want to see good surface details too, not just a good silhouette. However, I do think in the judges' eyes, they'd have Breon behind Urs. I know that sounds crazy, but they want that shape, and they want the outline first and foremost. And right now, Urs is closer to Chris Bumstead in terms of that classic look. But I think we can mostly agree, just because someone doesn't look like Chris, it doesn't mean that they aren't classic. I think Breon is more in the territory of modern bodybuilding. He doesn't have a bubble gut, he's not massive or anything, but he's more in that realm. And maybe the judges just don't like that, and they would rather pick a guy with no arms because he looks more like their golden boy. But I think Breon is classic enough, he's classic in general, and he's got the arms, which is a huge classic element. I would suspect that the judges saw this differently and would disagree with me, but I'm putting Breon in first here. Now, I do want to include the finals in this comparison as well. It's really unfortunate that the actual judges didn't score this show properly, but I will, and my scorecard will reflect prejudging and finals placings. Anyway, I think if you had any doubt that Breon was losing the front double based on the prejudging photo, you'll definitely lose that doubt when you take a look at the finals photo. Keep in mind, Breon gained 7 pounds to his weight cap going into the show, so he looked a lot fuller in general from years past. He's had to cut several pounds of muscle year after year, and that hurt his physique, but he did get a little bigger and a little fuller this year. But now here at the night show, he got even fuller from prejudging. It makes sense because he had to cut muscle to get to the weight cap, not as much as last year, but but it's still a brutal cut. Now, Breon is probably always going to look better at the night show because he's had more time after the weigh-ins to keep carbing up. And all that extra fullness helps him at the finals by filling out his legs a bit more specifically. His overall outline is right there with Urs now, especially consider the better details in the midsection and quads that remained intact from prejudging. So now Breon has just as good of a silhouette as Urs and still has the better arms easily, so he wins the finals even more than prejudging. So here's what I'll do. I'm going to throw the Urs fans and the judges a bone and retract my score from prejudging and give Urs the first place, but here at finals, I'm 100% giving first to Breon. I'm trying to see both sides here, so I think a split score on this pose at least is somewhat justified. The side chest is a little bit of an exposing pose for Urs. You can tell he's young. He doesn't have the thickness or the density in any area besides the side leg. For one, like in the front double, his arms look slightly thin. He can compensate in this pose a little by mashing his arm into his torso and doing other posing tweaks, so he's not quite as exposed in the arms as in the front double, but still, he leaves a little to be desired. But to be fair, Breon's short inserting biceps make his arms look a little less thick than Urs's. He has more of a pop because of his better peaks, but his peaks are a detriment here, unlike in the front double. It also definitely has something to do with how much Breon is twisting and throwing his arm a little bit behind his torso. Urs's delt also doesn't look near as beefy and as 3D as Breon's. Breon's rear delt and shoulder cap here are insane. All in all though, these are pretty minor details. Where Breon really beats Urs is the chest. Urs's pecs do not have the thickness nor the detail of Breon's. Breon's are jutting further out from his body and he's got some really good cross striations in the far pec. Yes, I did mention the side leg and how good of an area it was for Urs, and it is. It's a better side leg than Breon's, but that can't make up for losing the namesake of the pose. Urs's overall side leg is much bigger than Breon by nature of him being almost 6 foot, and you can't even retort by saying bigger is always better because Urs has the quality too. He's got some deep striations in the glutes, something we can't exactly say for Breon, and I think he's overall drier. But at the same time, Breon has some good size too for being several inches shorter and has good quality as well. He still manages to bring in some good separation between glute, quad, and ham. So even in his best area, Urs isn't blowing Breon out of the water. But like I said, Breon already won this pose based on the pecs. I think in the finals it gets a little bit closer. Breon isn't twisting as much here, so I think he's losing a little bit of the girth in the pecs. And we talked about how Breon filled out a little bit more at finals, but I think Urs did the same thing. It's not a huge difference, but the pecs do look to be popping out a little bit more, and the arm looks a bit beefier. Still though, Breon continues to have the better pecs, the crazy side delt, the good side leg. It's a little closer, but Breon's holding his good qualities intact to go on and win this pose based on the finals photos as well. The rear double is Breon's strongest pose by far. He still has one of the best backs in Classic easily. That muscle maturity really comes out to play in this shot. The detail is off the charts, the density and thickness are up there too. His entire back is also just completely crisp and devoid of water. The arms are also firmly in Breon's camp with those insane peaks, and the delts share that same crispness that was in the back, and they're just so much more developed than Urs's. Really, Urs's entire physique from the rear can just be summed up in one word: underdeveloped. From the delts to the arms and especially the back, he's a young gun. He just needs more time in the oven. He needs more time in the gym rowing heavy shit and pulling from the floor to build that density and carve that detail. The only area I'd give Urs is the lower body, but really it's just because of the overall size. Breon has nowhere near the quad sweeps of Urs. I think the glutes and the striations would be somewhat close. This photo was kind of blurry, and to be fair to Breon, he looks to have some deeper striations, but I don't know how much I buy that. And then in the hamstrings, I actually do have Breon. Again, the blurriness in the photo is hiding the detail of Urs's hamstrings. If you look closely, you can see Urs's hams are diced, but Breon's are thicker and they show up better on camera. Overall, I think with the added size, Urs may take the lower body by a little, but to be honest, Breon makes up for the lack of size a lot with all of his detail. This was never a contest though. Breon, as I said, has one of the best backs in Classic, and Urs had the worst back in the top 5 and probably even the top 10. In the finals, it yet again gets closer. Urs looks a bit drier here, and he's able to squeeze out just a little more detail in the back. Still, he's got the weakest back in the lineup though. But with this photo being a lot more clear and Urs being a little bit more dry, we can see the hamstrings a lot better now, and with their inclusion, I like his lower body as a whole more than Breon's. Breon had the detail to contend with Urs in this area at prejudging, but now that Urs has both the detail and still the mass, I prefer him completely over Breon. However, to be fair, the finals lighting was god-awful, and it washed out the darker guys a lot more. It hurts Breon a lot, casting too many shadows and washing out a ton of his details. But even with this trash lighting, Breon's back still has 3 times the amount of thickness and detail of Urs, and Breon is easily winning on that alone. I would still be willing to bet Breon and better lighting could narrow up the lower body, but he doesn't need it. It gets closer at finals, but Urs is still so far behind in the back, too far behind to win. So Breon takes the finals in the rear double on top of prejudging pretty easily. The abs and thighs is going to be a bit different from how I usually do it. I like to compare apples to apples, and at least for my classic comparison, I usually compare a standard abs and thighs pose between competitors, and then compare vacuum and abs poses as well. But the best I can find still, using photos from the comparison round, are the photos I ended up using here. I tried to find photos from the individual routines, but neither guy hit both of the poses. So to keep things at least somewhat consistent, I'm just going to use the comparison round photos. Anyway, I think the main reason I couldn't find all 4 photos I needed for this pose was because Urs didn't hit a vacuum shot, which is absolutely understandable and okay. For one, it's not required. I would like to see it in classic, sure, but you definitely can't penalize somebody for not hitting it, especially in Urs's case. I never liked his vacuum. I think his rib cage has an odd shape to it. I don't like it so much in the front double when he pulls a vacuum there, but it's at least tolerable. But when he pulls a vacuum as the focus of the pose and faces the judges head on, I really start to dislike it. So I'm not going to directly penalize Urs for not hitting the vacuum, but since Breon can, it's at least a small victory for him in my mind by showing some versatility. Other than just being versatile, Breon's vacuum is extremely classic, so even though he's getting beat in the legs clearly in both size and shape, he disarms Urs in the abs while looking very polished. Urs's are still developed nonetheless, but now it's not a head-on comparison, and Breon still has really good ab outlines with his vacuum. Overall, I think you could probably tell I like Breon more, especially with that vacuum and his classic look. If we're going for the overall classic look, I think Breon wins the pose handedly. That's really the whole problem with this division. Does the biggest, most complete guy win? Urs has the better legs and is using the traditional abs pose. I would definitely give this pose to him if this was in an open bodybuilding context, but is that what I'm supposed to do? Is that what the judges do? I think honestly it changes on a whim most of the time. But I like Breon's classic aspects. He has the vacuum, the smaller waist and more taper than Urs, and his legs at least showcase separation since they can't measure up directly to Urs's in terms of size. I still think Urs would place higher in the judges' eyes, but I beg to differ and I'm giving Breon this one from prejudging. Now in the finals, what I was saying about the classic versus open judging criteria is even more prevalent. For one, Urs is not hitting the typical abs and thigh shot, he's hitting a rather modern pose. I may sound like a boomer here, but I want to see something more classic. But on the other hand, Breon isn't blowing anyone away in this shot. In fact, since he's not using the vacuum, he looks even more meh. Overall, he still has aspects we can appreciate. His taper's good. It looks like he brought his lats up, which is really helping with that. Again, the legs aren't the biggest. They look a little bigger and sharper here from prejudging though, and the abs I think are a little bit better from years past for him. Usually his abs aren't that separated, and that's still kind of the case here, but I think we see a little bit more separation in the abs and a few more oblique details from last year. But with these things in mind, I still think I'm going to split the score on this one too. I still want to continue to give a little bit of each my own opinion and how I think the judges would have saw this. So even though Urs isn't hitting the most classic shot, I still like it. I think just hitting a different pose in general is somewhat classic. It's nice to see guys put their own twist on things. And you can't deny that his abs and definitely quads look much better than Breon's, especially because Breon is using the standard abs and thighs, and like I said, he's just kind of meh in that pose. He had the classic elements going for him at prejudging, but now Urs is the one drawing your attention, and Breon is the one looking pretty standard. To sum things up, Breon lost his classic advantages and is now getting exposed by a pretty powerful pose by Urs in both the abs and the quads. So I have Urs winning at finals in the abs and thighs. Now it's time for the last pose and everyone's favorite waste of time, the favorite classic pose. You guys know this pose frustrates me to no end. You can't judge it fairly apples to apples most of the time because half the competitors don't care and use very uninspired poses or poses they hardly practice, which end up looking bad. However, this isn't the case with these two guys. These guys are both terrific posers. We already know this about Urs, he's renowned for his posing. But who you don't hear about a lot in regards to posing is Breon. I feel he's very slept on. He's not a powerful poser like Logan Franklin or someone extremely outside the box and unique like Urs, but he has a really old school methodical style. He's a very slow, very artistic poser, which is something we saw a lot back in the old days. Sure, I wouldn't call him super innovative, but he knows his craft and he still has a unique style while borrowing a lot from the legends that came before him. He's the most underrated poser today, in my opinion. But that's enough glazing. How am I going to score this pose? Well, I kind of have a different thought process and rationale every time I do a classic comparison, but I think I finally settled on something. I think the posing as a whole needs to be judged, and unlike the IFBB, I'm not afraid to do it. So because posing should be so integral to the classic physique division, and this pose is such an anomaly anyway, I'm going to start using this pose as a way to judge the posing as a whole and have it included in the scorecard. Really, most of the time I'm giving this pose to the best posers on stage anyway, because those guys typically have the better classic poses to begin with, but this is a way to sort of flesh it out. So I've already watched both of these guys' posing routines, and I will link them in the description just in case you guys want to watch the full versions. Now, first and and foremost, Urs did steal the show yet again in regards to posing. He always does something a little tongue-in-cheek every year. This year at the Arnold, it was doing the worm on stage. This year at the Olympia, it was getting a call from Jay Cutler and then transforming into a robot. You can't lie, the crowd and the online fans absolutely loved this bit. But sometimes I think things like this can be too much, because after all, they're just that, bits. They're skits, they're stunts. I think what he did this year was a little bit more acceptable than what he's done in the past though. Doing the worm on the Arnold stage was cool, it's funny, I liked it, but let's not get it twisted, it's not exactly posing. It's kind of like Ronnie dressing up as Moses or a king or raising the roof. It can be cool if you do something with it, but if you just don't, it's just a bit you're doing on stage. But this year, like I said, I felt that Urs struck a good balance with this. He was having fun and making a joke, sure, but it did wrap around to at least showcasing his physique. Because that's what this is all about. Posing is a way for you to show off your physique exactly how you want to. So yeah, he was doing a bit, but that allowed him to show off his physique more because he was actually hitting poses during his routine. And of course, it obviously shows off his talent. Also, keep in mind this bit did not take up his entire routine, which is good. So how was the rest of his routine? Pretty good, actually. He really had everything. He had some power to a lot of his posing. He's very confident on stage, and he had a good variety of poses. He had some kneeling shots, some front shots, and the transitions were okay most of the time. There's really nothing of note I'd outright change or get rid of. But now let's move on to Breon's routine. I heaped a lot of praise on him at the beginning of this section, and that translated very well to this year's routine. I was saying Breon typically is more artistic and focuses more on the flow in his posing and leaves the powerful posing to the other guys. But after watching this year's routine, I think he's bringing a little more oomph to some of his poses. Still, he's focused a lot on the flow, but now he hits some really powerful shots with a lot of confidence. Honestly, having watched a lot of Breon's posing routines, he's really evolved. Probably the most out of any competitor, dare I say. I've noticed how he's always trying new things and adding in new attributes to his arsenal. Now, in terms of variety, I think excluding Urs's phone call bit, Breon actually had the more well-rounded routine. He had good power shots, kneeling shots, but we actually saw some back poses from Breon because unlike Urs, Breon actually wanted to show off his back. Breon also had a few more unique poses like the Sean Ray tiptoes pose and breaking out the splits, which is always insane to see, especially for someone like Breon who is over 40 years old. So I'll be upfront with this, I like Breon's posing routine more, it's more up my alley, but that's really because I'm a boomer when it comes to posing, admittedly. But objectively speaking, I think the vast majority of fans will have Urs ahead here, winning the posing category. The crowd went wild for this routine, it was well-rounded, even during the gimmick, and honestly fairly innovative with that considered. I've never seen anyone do that before. Breon is perhaps better from a technical perspective, and I do think he's pretty close to Urs as a whole, and again is massively underrated, but Urs just had it all. Like I said, he had the flow, the power, a decent variety, and of course the gimmick, while not being a complete joke. Now when it comes to scoring this one, I'm not going to break it up into finals and prejudging like the other poses, I'm just going to give one ranking for the posing round, and in this case, Urs happens to win. Now here is my final scorecard. As you can see, for each pose besides the favorite classic pose, I have 2 scores. For example, look at the rear double biceps. Breon won twice, so he gets 1 point for both prejudging and finals. And in that same pose, Urs lost both at prejudging and finals, so he gets 2 points for his 2nd place finish. That's how I scored them, but then going down to the bottom, I'm using 2 metrics to determine the winner. I have the number of poses each competitor won as 1 metric, but then the scores from both prejudging and finals as another. And as you can see, Breon won both. He scored a 7 at both finals and prejudging and won 3 out of 5 poses at the morning and night shows too. But in my opinion, this was with me being soft on Urs and trying to look through the judges' lens a lot of the time. If I was going solely off of what I wanted, Breon would have won every single pose at prejudging and the night show. I could maybe concede one of the abs and thighs to Urs, but really that's about it. And in terms of posing, I can go both ways. I did say I like Breon's more, and I do, but Urs's was definitely entertaining to watch, and really both guys get a pass for putting in a great amount of effort. So how can Breon win so easily in my book, but Urs beats him with a perfect score in the judges' view? Well, firstly, let's take that score aspect out of it. That entire scorecard was trash, so let's not focus on the actual score, just the fact that Urs was able to pull off a win against Breon. It just has to come down to 2 different judging criterias. In my eyes, Breon had better conditioning and details thanks to his muscle maturity, and he was more complete. Urs had considerable gaps in his physique. Yes, Breon's legs are still undersized, but they got better from last year, so he fixes the balance a little bit, but Urs straight up had missing body parts. Urs's back is very poor. Like I said, it was the weakest in the top 5 easily. And Urs's arms are very underwhelming too. He also needs a little bit more thickness from the side. Probably just in the upper body as a whole, if we're being honest. So yeah, Breon had weaker legs, but that's really all you can say he was missing. And really, it was just the quads. The hamstrings and glutes were fine. But Urs not only had 2 very weak body parts, but I think both of them are worse than Breon's legs are. So from a pure bodybuilding standpoint, Breon is more complete and easily wins wins. But this is classic after all, so we gotta account for the classic elements of each guy's physique. I know a lot of people say that Breon isn't very classic, and a lot of people say Urs is very classic. I disagree with both sentiments. Sure, Urs is more like Chris, he's taller and he's got similar weaknesses to Chris when he was coming up, and he probably has a smaller waist too, but you don't have to be Chris Bumstead to be classic. Think of the actual golden era and how diverse it was. You had Robbie Robinson, Franco Columbo, Lou Ferrigno all coming out of the golden era, but they're so different from each other. But all of them at the same time are so classic. The only things that scream classic to me about Urs are the small waist and the height, and posing if you want to count that. But take a look at Breon. He's got the small waist too, maybe not as small as Urs, but it's still tight. And he's got the more old school posing as well. And with Breon, he actually has those old school body parts like big arms and a big chest. Elements like those are just as classic to me as having a small waist is. I could maybe concede that Urs is a touch more classic, but Breon literally looks like a smaller Sean Ray. Sure, Sean isn't a completely golden era guy, but he is well known for having the classic elements, but also the completeness of the 90s. And really, that's kind of Breon in a nutshell. I don't want so much classic in a physique in exchange for missing body parts. It would be one thing if Urs just had below average arms or an average back, but those body parts for him are just straight up bad. So for me, Breon won this comparison easily. But let's try to take a look at this through the judge's lens, which seems to be classic shape above all else. If the classic shape is really so important, let's keep that same energy. Michael DeBull, who I'm a big fan of, should probably be lower because he's overdeveloped for this division, if anything, and isn't as classic as some of the guys who place behind him. But he still placed 6th. Why isn't Gabriel Zancanelli higher? He looks just like Urs in terms of structure. Well, that would probably be because he doesn't have enough muscle. But at the same time, guys with more muscle and less aesthetics, like Michael DeBull and others, placed higher than Gabriel. All in all, any way you slice it, this division in the judging criteria is hella subjective. To them, muscle counts more sometimes. Other times, it's the shape that matters most. And we can see this based on the placings. But really, either way, the criteria should favor Breon because I feel like he strikes a good balance. He's more developed than Urs, clearly, and is more than classic in his own right. The only way it can make sense to place Urs over Breon through the judges' eyes is if you only care about the classic shape. So much so that you ignore Breon's own classic elements and his head-to-toe completeness over Urs. And with all due respect to both Urs and the judges, that's not how I saw it, and I'm going as far as to say that's not how it should be. So to answer the question at the beginning of today's video, I had to say yes, Breon was robbed of 3rd place. I personally would have had Breon in a clear 3rd place, being more complete and just as classic as Urs. That's going to do it for today's video. Definitely let me know in the comments how you saw this comparison and let me know who you think should have been in 3rd. Do you agree with the original call and think Urs deserved 3rd, or do you think that Breon was a little bit better for whatever reason or reasons, and did he do enough to deserve the bronze medal? Let me know down below. By the way, if you guys are looking for high quality, great tasting supplements, go ahead and head over to risesupps.com. There you can shop for all your regular supplement needs from protein to pre-workout, while also checking out some amazing flavor collabs. From Kool-Aid flavored pre-workout to moon pie flavored loaded protein, whatever you put in your cart, make sure you use my code DHudson5510 to get 10% off your entire order. That's code DHudson5510 for 10% off site-wide at risesupps.com. With all of that said, I want to thank you guys for watching. Like this video, subscribe for more, and I'll see you all in the next one.